My conversation today is with the hosts of the Talk Gnosis channel and podcast, Jason Mehmel and Deacon Jon Stewart. As the current generation of what has been an evolving channel and conversation on topics in Gnosticism, Gnosis, esotericism, religion, philosophy, and spirituality, Jason and Jon have produced and curated a treasure trove of content, showcasing a broad range of expert guests and a generous portion of their own experience, wisdom, and insight. Their current running series is entitled What is Gnosis? And is a discursive exploration and attempt to map Gnostic ideas throughout history to the present day. We sat down to talk about Gnosticism and Gnosis, as well as the fading intellectual trend of atheism, mystical forms of spirituality, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. Jason Mehmel and Deacon Jon Stewart from Talk Gnosis podcast, a long-standing tradition and venue for the dissemination of Gnostic light. So thank you guys so much for being here today.
Oh, it's really our pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having us, Ike.
So I don't really get a chance to talk about Gnosticism, or at least not in necessarily in depth or even quasi-positive context on the show. So I'm really excited to be with you guys here today and to have this conversation. As I said off camera earlier, I'm hoping this will be a little bit of a the Knights of the Gnostic Roundtable sort of discussion. And so as an introduction to some of my listeners, why don't we start with where this all started for you guys? Not just Talk Gnosis, but where did your journey into Gnosticism begin? And now you guys can roll the 20-sided die to figure out who speaks first.
Jason, that's actually a great intro for how you got introduced to Gnosticism. So why don't you begin?
That's a great setup. Yeah, because I actually I got into Gnosticism through Dungeons and Dragons. I joke that I was raised lackadaisical Lutheran, which is to say that it was like practically a United Church experience, like lots of guitar, not a whole lot of hardcore theology or anything like that. And so I didn't have a strong connection to any real religious tradition. It was kind of just in the background for me. And then years later, I'm doing my undergrad in theater, making all kinds of art. And then a friend of mine is running a D&D game. Alongside this whole process, I'm deeply nerdy. And so we're doing a D&D game. He's setting it in the actual Earth history of around like 1000 and something, like the Byzantine Empire's going, that kind of thing. And he starts referencing these mystical hidden texts, and it turns out it was the Nog Comedy. He'd done a course. He's a history major, and he'd done a course on the Nog Comedy. He's an atheist. He's not even interested. This wasn't like a backdoor, conversion process for him or anything like that. He was just like, here's some really cool text, like the apostasis of the archons and all of this stuff. And he starts adding it into the D&D campaign. And I just got fascinated. So I started Googling things. Houston Smith has a really great lecture that's like deep on YouTube somewhere. That's, I think, still a solid introduction of the concepts. He calls it a Western path towards Asia. I consumed that. I consumed all kinds of other podcasts and lectures and books. I ended up finding a local community here in Calgary, Alberta, where I'm from, that is Christian but pretty non-dogmatic, the Apostolic Johannite Church. Gained a lot of friends there. That's how I met Jonathan. But yeah, it all started because it was a friend introducing a text to me. And maybe I should point this out. The thing that drew me in was not how it connected to any other religious tradition from my past, but that specifically it was providing me sort of, I guess, a spiritual framework to explain for me what happens when I'm making theater. A sense of like inspiration, indwelling light, that sort of a shared light kind of thing is of the divine spark. That's what speaks to me. And I think that also maybe speaks a lot to what then I ended up bringing even into the show, like where my focuses are. I'm often a lot less history focused and as academically focused, although I do get into it, compared to Jonathan, who now maybe I'll pass it over to him.
Yeah. So I first got into Gnosticism pretty young. I had a similar Christian upbringing to Jason. I grew up in the United Church. We have told our stories a few times on the podcast in some different situations, different contexts. So I always like to repeat myself because I don't want to slam any other religions, churches, denominations, paths. Right? Great upbringing, wonderful community. I love the social gospel. Right? But even at a young age, I had a strong pull towards the mystical, and without really even understanding it, kind of looking into Christian mysticism, finding out about Gnosticism, finding the Bishop Stephen Heller's the Gnosis.org page, right? Uh, Reading Philip K. Dick, but also finding just a book of alchemical emblems, right? And it was just illustrations from these amazing texts, and I wanted to know what they mean. Because they capture the imagination so much. There's crazy things happening. There's green lions. There's decapitated people. There's the people dying and being resurrected as fusions of male and female, so on and so forth. Uh, that said, and even though I knew that there were modern Gnostic movements and modern Gnostic churches, uh, I, I only knew about Gnosis.org. I only knew about Stephen Heller. He only has a few churches in his denomination. I'm like, I'm probably not going to live in LA. So, that's cool, whatever. But maybe I can incorporate this into my own spiritual life, right? And I knew that there were sort of Western esoteric movements like Martinism or the Fourth Way or Golden Dawn or what have you. But I thought that they were even more abundant than they were. I also grew up in a very small place, right? But when I moved to a slightly larger place for college, I did religious studies, and I, I was looking for something. I became a bit of a spiritual seeker, right? Trying out meditation and some other spiritual paths. Never that serious because the pull of Christ is hard for me to escape. And also, kind of going through that process, building a meditation practice, but then sort of drifting away from a formal spirituality and religion, right? Without becoming an atheist, about casting it aside, about stopping considering myself being a religious person, but not really being engaged in a community or in a rigorous practice. And then the middle age hits, right? So I enter my 30s and I start feeling that pull towards religion once more, and start looking. And I live in Montreal, a French city. I found the Martinist tradition. Through Martinism, I found that there are modern Gnostic churches in the French Gnostic tradition. There's more than the one that I knew out there, and I found the Apostolic Johannite Church. And became involved with them, even though they didn't have a local community, and just got more and more involved, and really liked what I saw, and eventually entered their seminary, and now have a great local community here in Montreal, and I'm part of this wider ecclesia. That said, because like you did point out that I'm a deacon, anything I say today is not representative of the Apostolic Johannite Church, right? I'm not preaching their doctrine, stating their doctrine in any way, or representing their beliefs in any ways. And of course, the AJC is a low dogma, low doctrine church at the end of the day. But still, I don't want people to think that I am fully representing the church. I'm just representing myself and Talk Gnosis. So, yeah. So I think that's how we got started. Now, like if I can keep talking, you asked about the podcast.
Yeah.
It has been running since a long time. What year is it? 2025? Did it start around like 2011, 2012? Now, the reason why I'm asking myself these questions is I didn't start the podcast and I wasn't originally working on it. So it was started by a friend of mine, and he eventually had to step away. But before that process, I think Jason and I are something like the fifth set of hosts, maybe Jason, in the more than a decade that the show has been running. But it's been pretty steady that it's been me and Jason for a while now, and it's been pretty steady that at least I've been on camera. So this seems to be hopefully the final iteration of Talk Gnosis, a podcast and YouTube show that Jason and I will do to the day that we die.
possibly the apotheosis of the podcast.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Well, and that's one of the most interesting things about the podcast for me when just kind of you guys have been around for a long time, but I only recently got interested, maybe like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and so I'm like looking through videos, and I'm like, wait, who the hell runs this thing? The interesting, it was just it's great because there's something about it where it's like the light is literally being the baton is being passed, and I think that a lot of in these sorts of situations and in these particular um corners of discourse and discussion and discovery, I think that there's quite a bit of synchronicity that comes into that. We're really, the word we would use is most likely providence, but
Mm.
so I really love that you guys are like Guar, no original members left.
Yes. We are like War in
No.
many ways. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally, totally. Like the G is silent. No, I'm kidding.
So
But no,
go ahead.
sorry, the thing did want to just jump in there is like I think there's there are I mean there are a lot of podcasts that are still going strong for a long time. But I think an interesting thing for us, especially even in the esoteric world, is that I think it was never only ever one person's like home or creative outlet. Tony Silvia, who was the I think probably I would say the seed of things, like the thing that really got things started. Even then, he was always making sure that there was other people with him along the way, other hosts that he would add in, and that it always felt like a shared space. And I think that has given us, I think, a really interesting freedom, even that that we'll do shows that are fairly tangential to practical Gnosticism or connected Gnosticism, but that I think our audience understands that because they're like, this has always been uh like a as much a community space, or like an agora to be within than like a single lectern or podium, not underwhelming or deposing any lecterns that also are podcasts out there. There's like the AJC has one called the lectern. I'm not even trying to make fun of it. It's just a joke there. But like um I just think that it's been really interesting for me to come in and feel like I can go, hey, what if we did a show about Barbie? You know, and feel like that made sense, within the context of the show we were already making,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that as well. Sorry, I'll add to that quickly, which is we quote unquote do veer off course quite a bit, depending on one's opinion, right? And we do sort of go all over the place of the last couple thousand years. But a lot of times, if we are taking a topic which has a looser connection to Gnosticism than, say, the Nag Hammadi text, right, or a show on the Demiurge. So, I've done a couple shows on the downsides of meditation, right? Well, we're not going to necessarily find that in a formal Gnostic text. But what Jason and I bring when we're tackling some of these topics is it's always a Gnostic show because we're looking at it through Gnostic perspectives, right? So we're unpacking and finding both the Gnostic hermeneutic and the Gnostic perspective and the divine spark, and the economic empty, maybe negative aspects of the thing that we're discussing, right? So it gives us an easy out. We've often changed we stopped doing openings to the show or any kind of introduction. People can find out about the guests from the show notes. We just dive in, but I used to open it with whatever I'm interested in this week. So it is obviously we do have that core, right? We're going to be talking a lot about books that have the G word in the title. We're going to be talking about Nag Hammadi a lot. We're going to be talking about a sci-fi piece where we know that the authors were genuinely interested in Gnosticism and worked it in. But at the same time, we're going to discuss lots of other things because there are ways of bringing the Gnostic perspective to understanding a wide host of things. And of course, if Gnosticism is true, if it is a religion or hermeneutic that allows us to understand the world, technically we can really discuss or look at anything. So we do have that core. We try to stick there, but we also get to have some fun and to expand, right?
Wonderful. Yeah, and I think that particularly in discussions concerning the adjacent currents to Gnosticism, personally, and I know lots of scholars, and they're my friends, that would say that this is reductive, but I don't really care.
Mm.
I find, Platonism, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, really, but the earlier, the stuff from antiquity, being very much a family of traditions. And for me, Gnosticism is the apex, the culmination, I would say, of those philosophies for several reasons. So I just want to make it clear here, because I don't get the chance to do this much. It's a subject very near and dear to my heart. I don't talk about it much for various reasons. One of which is because of the sort of nasty associations that people have with the term Gnosticism. Nazi occultism, a world hating and self denying worldview. But I'm also ordained and serve in what is, I would say generically, but not arbitrarily, referred to as a Gnostic church, not the AJC. I'm not going to talk about the actual body itself. I've mentioned it in other places, so people can figure that out there. But I want to hear from you guys. What do you think people get wrong about Gnosticism?
Oh
Well,
boy.
we only have an hour.
Well, no, we can go. I'll keep going. I love this.
Yeah. I'll start really quick before I let
Oh boy.
Jason, just to put in a little note for people who don't know. But over the last 30 years, there's been a lot of scholarly discussion about the term Gnosticism, right? That it's a heresiological construction that has a lot of inaccurate ideas that are part of the definition of it being applied to a wide range of groups in the first couple Christian centuries. Okay, and there is some truth to this argument. I think at the end of the day, however, we can talk about an ancient Gnosticism. A lot of scholars who really like Gnosticism and what we traditionally think of as Gnosticism will often, instead of saying Gnosticism, we'll talk about the Gnostics, the Christian Gnostics, the Valentinian Gnostics, the Cephean Gnostics, what have you, right? So that you can be more precise, so that you're not carrying these ideas that may not be correct about this group in with that being smuggled in by the definition. Okay. So I think that is good. I've tried to do that a little bit. Obviously, I'm always going to fall back. I actually do think that the term Gnosticism is helpful. I think it's helpful for describing these first century, second century, third century, etc. groups. That said, I try to use Gnosticism to talk about the modern phenomenon, the modern religious phenomenon, the modern philosophical phenomenon, the modern hermeneutical. Everybody who listens to this is smart. I find that people think I'm smart if I say dialectic and hermeneutic a lot, right? But the perspective, right? The Gnostic perspective, the perspective of Gnosticism. So I try to use that for the modern phenomenon and be more precise when talking about older groups. All that said, the scholars will say there's no such thing as ancient Gnosticism. The term isn't helpful or wrong. And the thing is they're not wrong if you're writing a thesis or a detailed book, right? You do want to get into these issues. You want to get into these careful definitions, but it's no different than using the phrase Christianity, right? There's more than 2 billion Christians, and you can't if you didn't know anything about Christianity, and one Sunday morning you walked into a snake handling holy roller church, and then you went to the most high formal mass that you possibly could at an Eastern Orthodox church, and it's a 4 hour long mass where you're standing, you're going to be like, this isn't the same religion. This isn't the same thing. If I go to a Catholic church, than the Mormons, right? If I go to a United church where they're probably not even going to mention Jesus, if they do, they'll blush. And then I go to okay, I'm running out of denominations, Baptist, whatever, right? It's Christianity, and same thing with the early Christians, right? It was a very complex phenomenon. So we find this with religion in general, right? There's a Hinduism, Buddhism. There isn't Hinduism, there's Hinduisms. There isn't Buddhism, there's Buddhisms. There isn't Christianity, there's Christianities. As it always was, as it always shall be. Gnosticism's not so different, so I'm not sure why the scholars really get their panties in a bunch sometimes about the term.
Well, they like to do
So
that.
Yes, they do like to do. I mean, it's their full time job. To be fair to them, right? Like it literally is. You got to interrogate these things. It's what you get paid to do. I meant that to be a short note. I think that you've asked us to rant questions. So there's the first part of my rant. I bet you I can pass the baton to Jason for a rant about what's wrong with Gnosticism, what do people get wrong about Gnosticism. Jason, do you have any thoughts on the issue?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think maybe the core piece might be that people focus more uh, on the structures of Gnosticism than Gnosis. um that like the like discovering these texts and these like archons and demiurge, etc., and like, oh, now like what ritual do I use to unchain myself from this world? How do I, what are the secret codes to get past the archons? If you just only join my Patreon or my premium member feed, then I'll give you all the keys. Like that stuff really bugs me because it's all talking about the things that all of the Gnostic ideas, I think, are actually trying to help you get past, not by like powering your way through the prison walls, but by like helping you recognize that there is no prison, Um, because anyway, what I'm kind of getting at here is that by focusing on gnosis, not focusing on Gnosticism, um, which is to say that like I think you focus on Gnosticism, you learn about Gnosticism to learn structures to approach gnosis, not to memorize structures to complain about demiurges, Um,
Yes.
that's I think the thing that I really like, that really kind of frustrates me is like um this like always pointing the finger at how bad everything is
Mhm.
as proof of Gnosticism, but that's not proof of Gnosticism. That's proof that you can point at something and say that it's bad. Proof of Gnosticism is gnosis, like is trying to reach towards gnosis. And it's like, I think that even the notion of it being a hardcore dualistic negative tradition is like either an ancient mistake or a modern mistake or both of not focusing on gnosis. And I think like the one thing here, the reason that this isn't just Buddhism, or not just, I shouldn't say just, the
Mhm.
reason it isn't the same as or parallel to Buddhism is that I think Gnosticism is asking you not to defeat the archons, but to be critical, a critical examination of everything that you're experiencing, almost like a Stoic approach. Like, is this within my control? Is this within my understanding? Um, how is this affecting me? How am I going to engage with this? And through that critical examination, it helps you remove the things that are in the way of gnosis. Um, and that criticism, that criticality should be extended even to the cosmology that Gnosticism is presenting, that Neoplatonism is presenting, that like no, there is no this is at least in my approach of it, like there is no single, like there's no Gnostic pope that can say, here's the final rule, here's how everything works, just follow this, you'll be fine. It is an individual constant criticism of your experience so that you can get past the things that are getting in that way.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well put. And one of the criticisms that I end up having of just esotericism in study and practice generally is that um, we approach esoteric ideas with unconscious exoteric biases. So we're
Mm.
using a perceptual filter that is rendering these things impenetrable. And so now we're adorned with this quote unquote, sacred symbolism that essentially we've turned into an aesthetic. And the main
Mm.
thing is that there is a symbolic reality that we have to talk about symbolically. I don't, I'm not, I talk about the demiurge. I'm not thinking about a sky daddy. I'm not
Hmm.
thinking about Plato's, demiurge in the Timaeus. I mean, if you want to talk about where that term and that idea comes from and go back to Timaeus, The first thing that Timaeus says, he has this whole prologue where he's like, look, I can't talk about anything literally. I have to talk about this symbolically. And for some reason, everybody just devolves into a bumbling literalist. And so the thing is, for me,
Yeah.
gnosis itself is what allows you to get above the weather and see everything below as symbols. And I
Hmm.
think that that's really important. And I mean, let's talk gnosis, right? What do you guys? How do you do? Let's dial in a little bit and challenge the listener. Okay, yes, I agree 100%. Focus on the gnosis instead of the Gnosticisms. But how are you defining gnosis? Do you and it's okay to have a personal sort of
Hmm.
subjective interpretation of that, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it is a subjective term, and to a certain degree, a subjective experience, because I think what Gnosticism is getting at is uh, I think when a lot of people hear gnosis or think of gnosis in the Gnostic framework, right? It's some kind of divine ascent experience, which of course was very big for the ancient Gnostics, even if modern Gnostics aren't really aware of that or thinking about that, where you are having a direct experience of the divine, which is unmitigated, right? And that's gnosis. You stop right there. That's it. I think that there's, for want of a better word, because I know Greek uses a number of different words for knowledge, but there's different steps. There's different kinds of gnosis. There's different insights which are part of the journey, right? So it's not just touching the face of God, which I shouldn't say just. That's pretty hard to do, and some of that is it's not dark night of the soul because that comes later, but the awareness, the waking up in the middle of the night with existential terror and realizing that there is something wrong, right? There is an alienation and an existential terror that I think is part of the Gnostic experience, which doesn't necessarily mean that I am a soul locked in a prison in a rotting body ruled by an evil demiurge. Right. What I am talking about, for me personally, this is me personally. This is not found directly in the Gnostic text, and it's not a teaching of the Apostolic Johannine Church. Uh, for me personally, all of reality has a crack in it. There is a contradiction within reality, and even people who are not religious, even people who know nothing about Gnosticism, the default is to deny this. Right now, we can look around us and think that some things are contradictory or some things are broken, but there's always a wholeness that I can get to, right? And again, let's not talk about religion for a while, right? I can buy that car, I can get that job, I can get that girlfriend. I will have that wholeness that I don't experience, and sometimes I see other people experiencing it, right? For me, the first part of gnosis is understanding that there's a crack in everything. Okay, the second step is realizing the crack in everything. That's how the light gets through. Right. So there's your second part of gnosis, and then third, fourth, fifth is this perhaps what we think of more as the mystical experience. That said, and you folks can disagree with me. I mean, obviously, you can disagree with me, but the mystical experience. It's not that some people are born shamans, but there does seem to be a genetic preset where some people can have mystical experiences easier than others. That does not mean that they are inherently better Gnostics or born to be better Gnostics. You know what I mean? So I think the other part of Gnosis, particularly if you are not one of these people who is easily triggered into having mystical experiences, is finding the spark in everything. And that may not be an overwhelming I melting into the oceanic one, completely getting past dualism and uniting with the universe. You understand? It's what Jason was talking about, that experience of doing theater, and finding the divine spark there. Writing a short story, the artistic metaphors. Or understanding the Gnosticism through art and art through Gnosticism becomes very, very obvious when you sit down and try to make a work of art right away. Right, you experience being the demiurge. You experience all the archons. You experience that Timaeus aspect, which is I have a pure, beautiful, perfect idea in my mind. When I try to get it onto the paper, when I try to get it onto the canvas, it will never be what's in my mind. It will never be the Platonic forms, right? There's a Gnostic experience. So finding these little sparks of gnosis, finding the divine spark in these mundane things, this is all part of gnosis. So I really should have put that in a straight line or as a gradual and then. But I think this is all inclusive of what the Gnostic experience is and what Gnosis is, right? And finally, again, this is my personal interpretation. I think that Gnosticism and the Gnostics, their self-choosing of that name is partly ironic because what happens in both the Valentinian and actually the Cephean mythos, so, which always messed me up when I first started getting into Gnosticism, which is I think most interpretations of Gnosticism is we strive to know the Father, the unknowable Father, the monad, the highest emanations, right? And we have Gnostic experiences by striving to have gnosis of the divine. Both the Valentinian and Cephean myths open with Sophia trying to know the unknown Father and failing. And then everything that happens afterwards is that. That really messed me up. She's an Aeon, and she can't have a Gnostic experience. She can't know the Father, right? How am I supposed to do it? What is this myth trying to tell me? And I think that perhaps for some of these, again, I don't want to get into stage thinking or, here's the path, do this, right? But I think perhaps the higher goals, the higher experiences is giving up on knowing, right? Is this complete surrender. We also have to give up everything we think we know all the time to progress as humans because we have all these presets, we have all these unconscious biases, we have all these bad ideas that we have absorbed from the world, right? So the gnosis, the Gnostic experience, is partly an on-knowing. It's letting those things fall away, and at the end of the day, surrendering to the mystery. What Sophia wasn't able to do, right? And which was part of her error. I think her quote unquote mistake or error. There's a few different things, but part of it was this not being able to surrender, this wanting to know in a very logical, direct, personal, understandable, day to day way. To know the unknown Father. So yeah, those are all of my many thoughts on gnosis.
Wonderful. Jason, you have any thoughts, anything that you want to contribute to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely like, what is gnosis? Like here I'm saying that should be our focus. And then like, okay, so what's the answer? But like, uh, John made an interesting point there near the end, I think around that, like, that even Sophia fails. So if it fails to know the unknown, like the monad. And I think like one thing that strikes me, and the reason actually I talked about like what keeps me in Gnosticism, what keeps me in a lot of this stuff is actually for me, it's very direct, the very direct connection I can make with it, with me as a theater artist. Like I work professionally as a theater artist. I'm also a writer. Um, and the work that I make is not explicitly esoteric in any way. Like I just did a play about the Alberta oil patch and pregnancy. That wasn't like I don't think anybody brought up religion in the play. Um, but I can still for myself feel like I'm participating in a Gnostic process. Um, because I think to John's point about that you can't like the failure is part of it, or the inability to know is part of it. At least the inability to access it through a linear fashion. That like I can read these books, I can like memorize these tables, and boom, gnosis. Like I like the same way you can pass a test, you know. But that I think if gnosis is like if we all have the divine spark in us, if gnosis is always emergent, then it's always right there, but it's never there by the process of adding things together,
Yeah.
logically. It's a matter of always um, finding this apophatic, uh, ineffable bridge, and what I think what art does, and I would say that, like, this might be a broad statement, but like, what is, religion, spirituality, esotericism, but some very structured artistic processes by which
Yeah.
people can then have a bridge experience to an ineffable thing. Um, and I think to your point there earlier, Ike, like, sometimes the trap is not hearing that first point of the Timaeus, which is, I'm talking about this. I have to talk about this obliquely. I can't tell you this literally.
Mhm.
Um, and then by ignoring that part, getting caught up in steps of logic or steps of assumption, uh, because, like, as soon as you start doing that, you start eating away at that bridge of ineffability. That inability to recognize something, or that inability to add
Describe.
your way, to describe, to logically process your way to something. Um, like poetry is defined by its ability to express something without necessarily speaking about it directly, you
Yeah.
know? And that experience we have when we like, the reason I say theater connects to me as a Gnostic is that when I am in the space and the show is working, the actors, myself, and the audience are all connected in a way that is indescribable. And it doesn't always happen. Like, if it was easy, it would just happen all the time. We would all be living in this moment of gnosis all the time in our lives. Um, but yeah. And I think, like, uh, often gnosis tends, like, I think, like, John's point about that existential, um, like, almost terror of it, I
Mhm.
think is also part of the like, that's stepping past the logic, that's stepping past the structure, is like, oh wait, there's no single implicit meaning that I can fully rely on as the complete foundation baseline.
Mhm.
It's all ineffable. Oh shit,
Yeah, you're sort of by proximity at that point, you're feeling the heat of the unknown, the unknowable, really, and that
exactly.
is
Yeah.
terrifying to all these human constructs. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
said the word. I was trying to kind of like goad that out, ineffable. The
Mm,
ineffability of everything, and to your point, I'm a musician myself for my entire life. I do find that poetic sensibility to be like when I decided to lay that part of my life. I was a career musician on the altar of sacrifice in the course of initiation. um I just found that I took to uh, magic, but also forms of sacramental liturgy. I took to it so much more easy because I had this sense of like I don't need to describe this. They're called the
mm,
capital M mysteries for a reason. Uh,
yeah.
I'm much more of a Platonist than anything else. Although I'm not going to completely pigeonhole myself there because I spent a lot of time in all of these traditions, both in study and practice. Um, I think it's the Phaedrus where Socrates tells Phaedrus, "No man will enter the temple of the Muses by art." And by art, what he means is techne, by craft.
Mm,
So there's a
mhm,
component of inspiration that you're required to have that in order to
mhm,
be to enter, and that is an ineffable experience. That you just
mhm,
the God entered me, the God inspired me. I can't tell you discursively how this was accomplished.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I think gnosis has something to do with that. I don't think anyone can ever name what it is, but we can all point at it together, from different vantage points. But
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
no, no, please go ahead.
Oh, please. Yeah. Okay. Great. I just wanted to hop on the point that both of you that brought up, right? The ineffable. I I think that a lot of people, maybe I shouldn't speak for Jason, but he can correct me. I think a lot of people misinterpret when we talk about Gnosticism in this way, that we are saying that it is all myth and symbol, right? But no, it is ineffable and can only be understood through myth, right? Symbol, metaphor. Okay, so we do encounter people almost exclusively online, very rarely in person, right? Who are very literalist about this mythology. And sometimes I try not to argue online. I try basically not even to dialogue online. Jason's much better at that. Thank you, Jason. I see you out there in the Reddits and the Discords doing Sophia's work. But that said, every once in a while, my lower nature takes over, right? And and I'll point out that you're basically being a fundamentalist and taking this stuff like way too literally. And I think what people think I'm arguing there is for purely symbol or purely psychological, right? You have Jung, you even have Lacan, you have lots of other people where kind of the Gnostic mythos could really be understood psychologically. But no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's fractal, that what happens in the Gnostic texts does happen in our minds because the human being is the summation of the universe, right? As above, so below. So, number one, that's what I'm saying. And then number two, the divine realities, we can't even come close to understanding them. So, this myth is what we need to use. And we have to understand that it's myth, and we have to understand that it's flexible, right? Like, if you read the secret book of John, like it's obviously a psychological process that is happening at the beginning of the book. It's God as a giant brain thinking, right? It can't be any more obvious. And it's like, well, why would they do that if they didn't want us to think about thinking and think about the brain? It's even more obvious in the original language with some context, right? The for instance, before I end this rant, a great point in the Cephian version of the myth, right? In the I should say the Secret Book of John version of the myth. The demiurge comes around because Sophia gets pregnant without her consort, and in the ancient world at the time, in philosophical texts, actually through the mouth of Socrates, Plato uses birth as a metaphor for thinking, right? And for birthing good thoughts and good concepts, and for birthing abortions, like the demiurge. Okay, so if you were a reader or a listener of this text, you would have known that in the first or second century. Okay, we don't know that now because that's not a commonly used metaphor in our day to day speech. Although actually giving birth to something kind of is, but anyways, we miss it, right? It goes completely over our heads. So there is some contextual stuff there that does help us to understand the fractal nature of these texts. But at the end of the day, I'm also not arguing against a transcendent or a supernatural God or things that happen in that text. I think that they actually happened right within the divine realities, but of course not in this very. I couldn't sit down with a bag of popcorn and see Sophia giving birth to the demiurge. You know what I mean? If I had a time machine to go back to the beginning of creation. So I just want to get that across because I think that this is a very common error for the handful of poor people who do listen to us that they think I'm strictly arguing for a symbolic, metaphorical, psychological interpretation of Gnosticism, which I'm not. Sorry, I just remember one more thing. That said, we like to talk about lots of things on the show, like psychology, like books, like how Gnosticism is sort of applied to our day-to-day life. Because I don't think you have to be religious or spiritual to get something out of Gnosticism, to be a Gnostic. I always refer to the great literary critic Harold Bloom, who is an agnostic or an atheist, right? An agnostic in the Jewish way, as many Jewish people are. They may not even believe in a supernatural God, but they can be quite devout in their practice.
Right.
Harold Bloom considered himself a Gnostic, but he considered himself a literary Gnostic. He saw Gnosticism working through how literature is created, right? And then how the critic interprets and criticizes that literature. So I want to open that up to people as an opportunity, right? So if traditional religion, supernatural deities is not your jam, I still think you can get a lot of agnosticism. Okay, wait. I remember one last thing, then I'll stop. The other reason why you want to do this is that Gnosticism is very obscure. It has a bad reputation, like you've touched upon, Ike. But it is omnipresent, and it's not just my broken brain seeing it everywhere. At least I hope not. It's the ghost that haunts the West. People think and act in Gnostic ways. We create Gnostic works of art. It's a big influence, a direct influence. Now I'm not talking about it being a ghost on many important thinkers and artists, and then lots of people don't know that. You don't realize, and you find out what that this person was influenced by Gnosticism, or 2 degrees, 3 degrees down a stream, so, of something that partakes of the Gnostic continuity. I think it is important to engage with everybody because it's just hanging around there, right? It's haunting around the images. So yeah.
And I think that, to your point here, to both of your points, speaking about the spectrum of uh, phenomenology that is attendant to the Gnostic worldview. I think it's really significant in being able to maybe, as you're saying, right, kind of engage with it at first, but also I think that becoming a Gnostic. I agree with you entirely, John. I that term does not bother me. I don't. I think it's very useful. And I think that part of the problem that we have, right, discursively in our modern
Mm.
era is that we keep chopping things into a million different pieces. And there is, like, let's just face it, right? There's a nobility to the duty of the academy in having to, you know, analyze literally by analysis to pull things apart. But at the same time, if all you are is a knife, if all you can do is take things apart, well, you can't arrive at any vision of wholeness. It's just not, you're dispositionally opposed to that worldview. I can't see the forest for the trees. In a lot of senses, you can't put these things back together with a mind, as you're saying, right? Nous, that is constantly chopping things into tiny pieces. So I think the phenomenological component is how that gets resolved.
Mhm.
There's a heavy significance to this in the initiatory and sacramental paths of Christianity and in general. But I'm interested in knowing, like, how do you guys engage with the phenomenological component? I mean, Jason, you talked about, the theater and poetry and stuff, but does it go any further? Is there like, um, you know, an overarching lifestyle? I mean, maybe John, you could speak to any of the engagement in the sacraments or anything like that. I mean, how do you guys day to day, how does the experience of gnosis, to whatever degree it's happened to you, you've achieved that,
Mm.
how has that renovated your experience of reality?
Yeah, Jason, I want you to start because I'm going to set you up, maybe in a way you won't appreciate. We'll find out. But I tease Jason on the show and in private, right? Because Christianity and church is not necessarily his jam. He doesn't hate it, right, Jason? But the
No,
thing
no,
is
yeah, I
that
don't hate it, but
he is a dedicated member of a liturgical Gnostic church, right? You barely miss a mass. You're always eating Jesus, right? You have a Gnostic podcast. You speak at a Gnostic church's conclave. You are deeply embedded, more so than many religious people, more so than obviously anybody who is secular or somebody who's like, I'm spiritual but not religious, right? You actually have a full churchy life, whether you like it or not. So so I am revealing that you engage with ritual and with sacrament, and within this form. But do you want to actually answer Ike's question, because I wanted to set you up a bit.
yeah, I think that's interesting. Thank you. And I mean, that's not a bad setup. And I mean, it's true. Like I think I've been I mentioned earlier, like there's a local parish here of the Apostolic Johannite Church that I attend, and I am, close friends with many of the people involved, and it's led me to Jonathan. Also, weirdly, Jonathan and I like nearly share a birthday. We're about the same age. We both wear glasses. We did theater. Like, I
We
mean,
we
we're
actually do share.
almost.
I think we share the same day. So I think we
Is it
are
the 24th? I thought you were
24th.
like the 24th.
No,
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
24th. Yeah. So
Wow.
sorry, you were saying yes. Yeah. Both born in the same place.
Yeah.
The list goes on and on.
It's
So.
yeah. Like there's got to be some sort of like weird like, Gnostic doppelganger myth we can find to exemplify this. But um anyway, yeah, no, and I think the other thing you mentioned there, Ike, too, is that this was something that I would be bringing up way back in the day when I first started even hanging out with the parish here, which, like, honestly too, like I wasn't yearning for a Christian experience, I wasn't yearning for a sacramental experience, but it was like the first hit for like Gnosticism Calgary, you know. So I went and made really close relationships there. Um, but the question I kept asking is like, okay, but what does all of this like theology and like symbolism and even the sacraments, like how does this help me when somebody cuts me off in traffic? Like how does blaming the demiurge help when I am still in traffic and can't get where I'm going, you know? Um, and and so where that's led to for me generally is I think is like a meditation and mindfulness practice that I try to participate in. Also, like within the esoteric groups that I'm part of, there are definitely I try to make sure that I practice um, rituals that connect me to my community that are focused on the notion of community. Um, which I see as incredibly valuable, and I think also is what helps make sure like we were talking about how gnosis is ineffable and each of us are finding it in different ways. And yet there is also this like clear commonality of experience where we're not talking about like sometimes you'll see online, especially like in like chaos magic circles, this idea of unverified personal gnosis, which might mean I took a lot of mushrooms and I had a weird experience that I can't talk about. This isn't that. Like this isn't just something weird happened, but this is something something ineffable happened that nonetheless feels connected to an experience bigger and wider than me. And it tends to show up, I think, in religious practices, in artistic practices, and it also tends to show up with expressions that exemplify community, exemplify charity, exemplify care and love, which is also why I get so frustrated at uh, at the those who are sort of selling a Gnosticism of, like the world is terrible and you need to escape it um, because that clearly doesn't show that they've had any gnosis, like gnosis would be like helping you connect with a community, not you helping draw lines between a community. Um, but yeah, so yeah, I think like to roll it all the way back, I think my day-to-day practice does involve some like mindfulness. It does frankly actually involve trying to be artful in my religious practices, like to see them as art experiences, not to reduce ritual and religion and esotericism down to what we think of when we think of art, which is like art classes and moving paint around on a canvas, but to raise the notion of aesthetic to the hallowed halls of what we consider to be religion and magic and esotericism. Um, yeah, I think maybe that's quite a long ramble there. When I do participate uh, in the liturgies and the sacraments and things like that, I will say that I'm not like despite Jonathan's point, despite having been the longest continuous member of the Calgary parish other than the priest, um, uh, I have nonetheless never found it to be for that to be the transcendent experience, but the community has been the transcendent experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't really have the transcendent experience until I administered a Eucharist.
Oh, interesting.
Until I consecrated I fell apart. I was crying like a child.
Ah,
For the first time in my life, I was home. So, yeah,
just I'll make this very quick because I know we Jonathan has to mention here too, but that actually makes me feel really connected to my like the reason I connected to this so deeply with my theater experience is that when I started directing and making theater, I felt even more connected to the work than I was as an audience member. So
yeah.
that just yeah, I think that
Well,
that really
and
struck me.
it goes
Yeah.
back to what we were talking about, that inspiration, right?
Yeah.
As an actor, there's an intermediary between you and direct inspiration, and that's the director. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing in a church. When I go and I receive the Eucharist, there's an intermediary, and that is the officiating priest.
Yeah.
However, if I'm the officiating priest doing the consecration, I am directly mediating that, and so that the
Mhm.
full force of that power actually has the effect, the renovating effect of very, very momentary but wholeness.
Yeah. Ah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, man. I mean, this is look at us, three Gnostics having fun, defying all odds. Yeah.
Jonathan, I think you still need to go here. I rambled for a while.
Yeah, again, I come from the Protestant low church tradition, and some of that is hard to shake, right? Although I would argue the entire West has an unconscious, maybe not the entire West, but North America, the Anglo-Saxon West, that has a Protestant bias in how we approach religion generally. Even people who are secular, atheist, agnostic are Protestants, but that's a different rant. So that said, I have started to feel the pull like in my teens towards more formal liturgy. And even again, as a child, taking the Eucharist, which in the United Church is symbolic, right? That there isn't the real presence in their theology. I would feel immensely moved. I would have, even as sometimes as a child, have mystical experiences taking the Eucharist, and that even to this day, sometimes receiving the Eucharist, I've definitely encountered the real presence, especially in the sacramental context, right? So as a deacon in our church, I can administer the Eucharist. So my bishop supplies me with the consecrated hosts. Um, so, but so I have a great appreciation for ritualism and sacramentalism. I think that they're really great. But sometimes we have a bias against them due to our Protestant backgrounds. I think that they're really great because outside of some of the theology, the high fluting stuff, there seems to be a human need for ritual. Okay, and that is not often given an outlet in secular society. Now, I'm not saying that if you are not into ritual or sacramentalism, you should go out and do so. But it does seem that there is a need for ritual, and that there could be a way to incorporate that into your life, regardless. I have actually seen there's a Psychology Today article that was like, "Hey, are you an atheist or agnostic?" Actually, studies have found that ritual is good for you, so you should like set up your own personal rituals, right? Um, that's it. I am a forgetful, inarticulate, very clumsy, oafish person. So I am always trying to be a better ritualist and sacramentalist. So in the AJC seminary, the mass that I often celebrate here in Montreal is our contemplative mass, which is the I don't want to say informal. It's not at all, but it's mostly based around meditation and contemplation. There's very few words and actions, and the Eucharist is kind of in the middle, right? I have celebrated our more formal mass, a mass that for people who are not familiar with the AJC, would be similar to what you would see in a more formal Catholic church, the Anglican church, the Lutheran, the high Lutheran church, right? I have celebrated it here in the deacon's version, but I'm not that good at it. I'm always telling our patriarch, our head bishop, Sean McCann, that okay, I'm going to get better at this. So I've started to practice at home. We do, of course, have workshops and videos and education and training through the church as well. So I'm trying to get better at that so that I can offer the local community that experience. So they really like the contemplative, but it's good to mix it up. So that's where I am with that. And just right now, because we are talking about our personal lives, I always feel like such a complainer because I have a 2-year old, and lots of people out there have kids and are able to do things. But I found it a bit more challenging between that and work and other responsibilities. And I've sacrificed my office to temporarily to be our storage space. So I'm finally got the office back set up, and kind of my project for this year for real is to become a better ritualist. And for people who are watching or listening, again, there seems to be this psychological need for ritual, period. But because I do have a mindfulness background, right? I always think about the Japanese tea ceremony, walking meditation, right? If we could be fully present to doing anything, that is an intensely spiritual practice. So just having that, it's like, why am I doing ritual? What if there is no supernatural God? What if there's not a miracle that happens with the Eucharist, right? Then I know I'm not wasting any time because I am doing my best to be fully present. And ritual is actually a really amazing form of mindfulness because you are engaging everything, right? Everything that the human being is made up of. All five senses, the soul, the heart, the spirit, right? Everything is engaged when you're doing it well. So, yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
Well, and I'm glad you contributed that because I think it's important, right? I think what I said at first in terms of speaking to my own experience might have sort of subjugated the average, church patron or patron of the Mass of the Eucharist. In a huge sense, theologically, or at least in terms of, the theoretical dogma behind the consecration of the hosts, and is that, yeah, it actually is, if the gifts have been ratified by the divine, then it is actually the parishioner gets to have that unmediated experience because they're communing with the body and the blood. It just didn't happen that way for me. I know it happened that way for my mother. My mother used to have the same experience I had. Um, my first few times celebrating Mass and consecrating the host, she used to have that just from taking the Eucharist. So, and I, again, I have no logical explanation for why that happens. Maybe I just need to be the center of attention. That could be a big thing too.
Well, I think there's a quick thing to jump in on there too, and I think Houston Smith makes this point of like big G Gnosticism, which is to say the academic study, the texts, the framework that we can use to talk about Gnosticism, and then there's small G Gnosticism, which is just the experience of Gnosis, and like in that respect, like my mom is has had, I think, has a really solid, healthy relationship to Christianity. She takes part in Mass. I think she is having a Gnostic experience, or she is experiencing Gnosis in that sense of community and connection. She doesn't care about Gnosticism, she doesn't need to.
Yeah.
It's only Gnostics that need to care about Gnosticism. Do you know what I mean?
That's great. That's fantastic.
That might be a merch thing. Maybe we'll put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. I just feel like if you guys can keep going, I'll go for longer today because this is such a great conversation, and I love hearing from both of you guys. But I'm interested in some of your thoughts on Gnosticism and early Christianity's I guess maybe somewhat taboo perspective that they're actually more, or at least equally Hellenistically influenced as they are from the Hebrew tradition. That is something that I have encountered in many, I would say, private conversations. But I'm interested because I happen to in connecting with the traditions and performing them and doing this stuff phenomenologically, and then also studying them, I'm coming more to the conclusion that this stuff is way more the actual sort of Christ event, let's call it that. It has much more consonance. It's situated within the Hebrew, Mashiach, that whole thing, but that seems to be just a vehicle for these Hellenistic ideas. I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I off base here? What do you guys think?
I gotta go.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
before you, no, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I gotta take this one, Jason. No,
Yeah.
so have you read Margaret Barker? I'll start there. So read Margaret Barker.
Okay.
We'll talk about that sometime. So
Okay.
Here's the thing: is that the Judaism? I don't even like saying Judaism, right? It's the Second Temple Hebraic religion of the time. It's you can't separate Hellenism, Judaism, Hellenism, and the Jewish thought at this time, right? Because everybody is thoroughly Hellenized in this area. They've been Hellenized for 300 years. Okay, so the language that they are using to communicate their ideas is going to be Hellenic because there is no other way that they can do so, right? The fish does not see the water that it swims in. Um, that said, do early Christianity's Second Temple Judaism and Gnosticism, the three are siblings, are they incorporating ideas that were not found before the invasion of the Hellenes? Right? Are they reading Plato? They're taking in ideas both consciously and most importantly unconsciously? Because again, there is an entire Hellenic worldview that they have been born into for decades and centuries, right? Yes, absolutely, right. So it is a fusion, but it's hard to understand a fusion when you don't have two separate poles, right? So the trying to tear these threads apart, seeing them as opposition in any way, seeing them as completely separate, it just can't be done, right? It's a gumbo, it's a big soup. So that's my perspective on that. Sorry, Jason, I had to jump in there and get that out because again, it's one of my many bugbears, one of my many bugaboos.
Yeah.
And this is what we find in the scholarly literature over the last 30, 40 years, right? It takes a long time for scholarship to sort of get out there and get into people's minds. So there was an old scholarly paradigm that if you took religious studies or read books about the New Testament or what have you, that was very big on this clash, this conflict between the Hellenic thought and Judaic thought, right? But it's just not there. And of course, you can sort of see things like the Maccabees or the Book of the Maccabees, right? And you're like, well, obviously they're in conflict. Well, that's a later text that is reflecting some very specific political stuff that is going on at the time that it's written,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it has a bit of an artificial construct. But if I had a time machine and I went back and I kidnapped Philo of Alexandria and I brought him here on his show, right? And you asked, are you talking about the Judaism or Hellenic thought, right? Well, he'd be like, no, I'm talking about. Well, he wouldn't use the phrase Judaism. He'd be the religion of my people, right? He would deny. I mean, here's a guy who can't write a sentence without referencing Plato in some way. He would deny that in any way that he was Hellenic, and of course he would also say I can't remember how it works, but the in Philo and in some other thinkers of the time, right? There's this idea that Plato and all the other greats they actually traveled to Jerusalem and they learned everything they do at the temple.
Yeah.
So actually, Hellenic thought is not Hellenic thought. It doesn't come from the Greeks. It comes from the from the Jews originally. You even have that in the Hermeticism. Actually, the Hermes the Trismegistus was actually Moses in one thinker's at the time slot. The excellent scholar Dr. M. David Litwaw. He has a whole video on this Moses
Mhm.
as Hermes thrice great. Okay, got that rant out. Jason, go for it.
Well, honestly, of the two of us, Jonathan's much better at this level of stuff because I'm not as immersed in the academic and the theoretical on some of this stuff. But I think like to me, it only makes sense. Like it just seems clear that there is that that both Gnosticism and literally just what became dominant Christianity are this result of an intermixing of a lot of traditions and ideas and cosmology in ways that made sense. Like I often joke inside some of the group chats that Jonathan and I are part of that that what we now look at as like a lot of Christianity and a lot of monotheism, frankly, is what happened um, when a very specific tradition of Judaism and like Second Temple then got associated with a theoretical concept like Plato, and a theoretical concept that went from this is like instead of it being, oh, this is my God and I'm worshiping my God in my way and you're worshiping your God in your way, to, oh, it turns out that like this God is actually the God over everything. Like this notion of universalism, that it had to be true for everybody. that like with Plato, when things were kind of abstract and theoretical and like realm of ideas, it's all a little soft and fuzzy, like in terms of officialness and literalness. That was kind of like you're like, yeah, okay, there's this over like this wiki of religion of over and above everything. Okay, yeah. But then as soon as you're like, and now I'm the moderator of the entire wiki and I have to control it all, and like that Earl from Schwepp from the Secret History of Western Esotericism podcast had a great moment in an episode a while ago where he pointed out how weird it was for the Romans when the Christians started saying,
Mhm.
"Oh, we were the only like our God is the only one," you know, and that other traditions were like like the Greeks over here would be, worshiping Ares or whatever. No, Ares is Roman. Anyway, I think you guys get my point here. I'm not going to try
Yes.
to get onto the
Yeah,
details.
Ares was Greek.
Oh, Ares was Greek?
Yeah, Mars was Roman.
Yeah.
Mars. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Clearly I'm
Yeah.
fuzzy on both of them. But that it was this idea that yeah, I'm gonna like sacrifice to Ares and I'm gonna do these things, but I'm not sitting here thinking that Ares is in charge of absolutely everything on this like ontological level. You know, it was more like I believe in Ares the way I believe in trees, in that it like at that level of just general assumption. Like I don't need Ares to do anything. I don't need trees to do anything other than just be trees. But then it was like, oh, there's this that there must be a realm of ideas, and that realm of ideas must be better and higher than everything,
Mhm.
and that God must be up there in a very like literal way without metaphor. I think because it got connected to this like um, very like direct community in a specific period. Like when
Mhm.
those two things got married, I think that's where the confusion starts.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think
that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. But I think one of the things is so the whole reason why I kind of bring that up is to talk to sort of lead the conversation in terms of uh really my concern being less theologically and more practically. And this
Mm,
is kind of what I mean. There is obviously a philosophical tradition going back to at least Parmenides talking about how God must be one. Yeah, we have it's like
mm,
the Pink Floyd album cover for The Dark Side of the Moon. You've got the white light hitting the tetrahedronal prism and the seven rainbow spectrum. Those okay, you got the gods of the rainbow and or Theos, the God,
mhm,
is the white light. So there's that juxtaposition that is highly philosophical. And when you bring that stuff to lay people to the laity, they're not gonna be conversant in the symbol systems and be able to transpose what does this symbol mean? What do I mean when I'm talking about the craftsman? What do I mean when we're
mhm,
talking about nous? Like what does that stuff mean? But what I see happening on the historical record, especially growing up Christian in Roman Catholicism, and my dad's side is Greek, so Orthodoxy is Greek Orthodox. Uh, Obviously it's a little bit more it's much more present in Orthodox, but like Catholic people don't understand that anything about like how Plato relates to and it's funny because John was talking about how Protestantism is I mean I think it's one of the worst things that ever happened to Christianity because
Yeah.
it took all the magic out of it,
Yeah.
completely decontextualized it in the way that John so eloquently was able to reconstruct. But
mhm,
you do start seeing in the historical record around that time, the Alexandrian period, Greco-Roman, Egyptian period. You start seeing the Septuagint translation. You start seeing the Hekaloth literature, and so it's particularly what by way of talking about the Hekaloth literature, talking about how really I think the Christianity really revolves around this sense of sacramentality and these right we have rites of initiation, the major one's baptism, right, across all of the denominations, really, for the
mhm,
most part. The major ones here, you get baptized, and obviously we offer the Eucharist. So I think that I see a theurgic component in there, and
mhm,
I very very specifically theurgic And I'm wondering, this whole idea of transcending fate and transcending harmony, I think was one of the main arguments that Christians had in the early stages. So I'm wondering if you guys could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the early stages, and this is where when we talk about early Christianities, they uh, they share a lot of the same ideas. Okay, and there's this misunderstanding that the Gnostics in the first couple Christian centuries, the main reason they disappear is because they're persecuted, right? But one of the main reasons they disappear is Catholic. The word means universal. Is that the universal church is established, and it starts bringing in these other groups, bringing in some of their doctrines and bringing in some of their texts, right? So that's a big hit for the Gnostics. So, for instance, the Gospel of John is probably originally a proto-Gnostic text in my belonging to some proto-Gnostic Johannites. So this transcendence of faith, this transcendence of fake gods and idols, right? These sound like very, very Gnostic ideas. And for people who don't know, the Gnostic texts are really, really obsessed with fate, right? And how to get past fate, right? You're liberated from fate through the sacrament of the baptism. So I think you're really on to something there. That this is a central idea for Christianity in general, as well as Gnosticism, as is the sacramental theurgic aspects, right, which I think are there from day one. Now, again, because of our Protestant bias, right, everybody. I shouldn't say everybody. If you grab somebody off the street, many people, even if they're not interested in religion, not interested in Christianity, if they're not Catholic, and you ask them, some questions about how they think Christianity developed, most people are going to say that Jesus was this cool guy, this agrarian guy, who was a humble teacher who went around and just hung out with people and used agrarian metaphors to talk about life, and that was it, right? And then somewheres down the line, probably not his disciples, probably not the children or disciples of his disciples, but at some point, the year 150, 250, 350, at one of the great church. I want to say conference, but that's not the right term. That they decided to invent all these rituals, probably to control people, right? To invent all of these sacraments, probably to control people. And actually, Christianity would be better if we just got rid of all that stuff, got back to the core, right? So this is a very common idea. This is a very mainstream idea. It's a bad idea. It's a wrong idea. It's a very Protestant idea, right? That it's there unconsciously, and we do find it. We used to find it a lot more in scholarship. It was sort of the dominant scholarly view because in the West, dominant scholarly view because. In the Anglo West, because the first important the historians of Christianity were Protestant Germans and Protestant Anglos, right? Uh, so yeah, it's there. It's there from a very, very early period. It's there from day one. Sometimes I don't have a time machine, but I'm completely open to the idea that Jesus did establish the sacraments as is the taught in mainstream sacramental churches. Again, when I'll recommend Margaret Barker. We talk about her a lot in AJC and other circles. So she's a theologian and historian. But once her ideas kind of get into your brain, they really get in there. And she really sees the church's sacraments as being in continuity with the Judaism that comes before it, right? It's actually it's kind of an open sourcing of what's going on in the temple, but being offered to everybody in any situation. It becomes even more important, of course, when the temple is destroyed. Now, that's not to say that there again, because we can't separate Judaism and Hellenistic thought, that there is an Hellenistic influence upon these theurgical acts, right? Because there can't be any way that there's not. So the sort of internet atheists for a long time have pointed towards the Eucharist and pointed to Greek pagan rituals and meals that are similar. And it's like, yeah, are they similar? Absolutely. Was it an influence in the way that they're expressed? Absolutely. Is that their origin, right? That in the year 70, did somebody, see somebody doing some sort of Eucharistic act or ritual to celebrate Dionysus, and then they decide to steal it for Christianity? No, right? Absolutely not. So I think sometimes understanding how the influence goes back and forth and getting past some of these biases that many of us have can really illuminate this theurgic thrust that is an important aspect of early Christianity and is there historically and is not a later rewriting or reinterpretation.
Yeah, it's really funny. I've used the analogy before. That would be like blaming me for having my parents' genetics. It's like, oh, you
Yeah.
stole your dad's blood. Like no, I am just the evolution of it. Well,
Yeah.
that's debatable. But what are your thoughts on any of that, Jason?
Well, I think we can all agree that that Easter was adapted from Ishtar very directly. There's a paper trail. I'm 100% joking. That's almost directly a prod at my local parish here. The priest hates that whole connection. Um, but and I agree with John, and I think you made a really great way of saying it there. Is that like, are ideas in the air, and are they being grabbed and associated at like by the people at the time? There's also, I think, a piece to all of this in terms of like how these ideas are getting melded together. It's also probably worth looking at it from the political dimension of Rome and Christianity around that time. Like, as Christianity got bigger and more influential, then like Rome starts being a part of, and Roman aesthetics, Roman structures become more a part of that whole thing. Like, I probably got more interested in Christianity by learning about, like, by doing the History of Rome podcast and going like, oh, that's where that comes from. Oh, that's where that comes from. Oh, like, um not from a like, it didn't affect me spiritually, but I found it really interesting aesthetically, like how a lot of these things kind of developed. Um, because like Rome was famous even before Christianity for saying, "Oh, the God you worship over there is, well, like, we've got a similar God, and why don't we just say it's the same thing? Like, why don't you just keep doing your thing and just add a tithe to Rome and the emperor? It's all good, like." um and I think there's a lot of like things that that are now just baked into what we think of when we think of Christianity, that are like part of that soup of the like first 200-300 years, of things getting associated. So yeah, like there's Plato in there, there's like Second Temple Judaism in there, and then there's like Rome syncretism, and then but also like Rome politics. Like, how do we get consensus on these things? You know, yeah, so I think that's to me, I think is absolutely like a fascinating way of looking at all of it. And I think, like, kind of again going back to that notion of the ineffability, not seeing any of those sources as like uh recognizing the aesthetic flow of these things doesn't mean that they're not pointing to an ineffable thing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
By being able to find out that, like, maybe we have halos because of sun gods, doesn't mean that divine light isn't a good image. You know what I mean? Or a useful approach, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like I have about 14 different things I wanted to talk about that we didn't get to. So we're going to have to do a part two. You guys got to come back on. I love
100%.
talking to you guys. I love that we get to go head first into this. This was a really, I think, in-depth discussion today. But I want to give you guys the opportunity to talk about anything forthcoming that you might have individually or jointly, or anything new with the podcast.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Sorry, can I get in there, Jason? Because
yeah.
I want to advertise. Do you know when this comes out, Ike? Um,
When do you need it to come out?
Okay, so the church that we are members of, the Johannite Apostolic Johannite Church, every year it does a yearly conference or conclave. This year it's May 8th to 13th, 2025. It's hybrid. It's both online and in person in Atlanta, Georgia. So again, you don't have to be a member of the church. You don't have to be a Gnostic. There's probably something that you will find interesting if you are at least even a little bit interested in esotericism and mysticism. So Carl McColman, the author of the new big book of Christian mysticism, Eternal Art, Answering the Contemplative Call, An Invitation to Celtic Wisdom, Unteachable Lessons, many more books. He's a very well-known Christian mystical writer. He's going to be the keynote speaker. We got Dr. Shirley Paulson, who's going to be talking about the thought of Noria. We've got Dr. Levina Cerrone. Lots of great speakers. So definitely check that out. Again, you can join online or you can join in person. For Talk Gnosis, we keep saying podcast. It actually started off as a YouTube show, and the original founder didn't want to do it as a podcast because he thought he would drop the YouTube numbers, and he's correct, it did, but we don't really care because we just want to get it out in any way that people want to consume it. So check us out, Talk Gnosis, both as a podcast and on YouTube. And feel free to get in touch if there's anything that you want us to talk about, show topics, what have you. Finally, before I pass it to Jason, who will tell you about a project that we've already announced and did a show on, but
Mhm.
we do have some new programming, newish programming coming to Talk Gnosis, which is thanks so much for having us on because I am obviously a good and holy person who's probably just a few inches away from enlightenment or divinity. But I've been doing the podcast. I worked behind the scenes before becoming the host, by the way, a host. So I've actually been working on the podcast for a while, and you're only the second person in a decade to ever invite us onto their show. And of course, I don't invite people onto our show thinking that they'll invite us back because everybody has podcasts nowadays, right? So every second person we talk to has a podcast. That said, it would be nice. It'd be nice if a few people reached out. I think we're pretty interesting. I think we're pretty cool. So even though I am almost enlightened, I do not. I'd like to confess and admit that is one. What's the word I'm looking for? One lower aspect of that I am expressing, but still, it'd be nice. So thank you, Ike. You are guaranteed to get into Gnostic Heaven for getting us on.
Well, I've been tainted with Gnostic dirt myself, so you guys are always welcome here.
When we get into our second show with you, I think maybe we can also get into that the why there is that taint, like where a lot of that comes
Yeah,
from, because I think that's
yeah,
a whole other thing I wanted to talk about too. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so but in the spirit of wrapping up, which is hard for us to do, one of the things we are working on the podcast is something that I've been calling mapping Gnosticism. I think like one of the things, so our podcast has had a long history. To Jonathan's point, we have a YouTube channel and a podcast. But the podcast actually, I think, has far more listeners than the YouTube channel has viewers,
Yes.
and I think that's great. Like we get a lot of consistent downloads from that, so we're thankful for that audience. But because we've had such a long trajectory, I think there is a space in which that one thing we haven't talked about lately, and what a lot of our listeners who've only been listening in the last 10 years would not have caught is some discussions about Gnosticism like we're having here, which is not just talking about someone's book or or a movie or like some other subject that we were pointing towards, but pointing back towards Gnosticism and I am not Gnostic ideas. And so we're working on a project I'm calling Mapping Gnosticism. We started off by just saying, why do we think we want to map Gnosticism? That was our first episode. We've already put that out. We've put out an online survey, which I think should be findable on our website. And if not, it's like I think I've posted about it everywhere that a Gnostic might look. So, Google that and you'll probably find it. But and like give us your information about where you found Gnosticism, where you're currently finding it, because we want to really talk to and with the community. Like where are they getting their ideas? What ideas are they finding the most engaging, and engaging with those ideas and starting to really talk about them. we're probably going to steal some of what we talked about here for an episode we're going to do talking straight up about what is gnosis, why is it ineffable, that kind of thing, and getting into a lot of other subjects. So tune in for that so that you can hear instead of going back to like 14 years ago, what did Tony and some of the other folks there think Gnosticism was then? What are we thinking Gnosticism is now? So yeah, pay attention to that. What else to mention? Oh, one thing in terms of just since we're wrapping up, a little like postscript I want to add. A couple times, Jonathan, I think has said like I don't speak for the AJC. I'm not representing them. Well, the first time I ever heard that, it sounded to me like it was a matter of firm control over a message. Like Jonathan isn't allowed to speak about it, things because they only want certain messages to come out certain ways. That's what I'm now learning, and because I'm not a priest, I can say this freely. I don't represent the AJC, but now that I'm around them more, I think what I understand is that the reason they're so focused on that is that they do not want someone coming to them uh, feeling like there's one way they need to follow things. They are trying to create as open a doorway as possible, as least judgmental and least dogmatic a method as possible. And I think that can be lost or not understood when we're only hearing people say, "I can't speak for them." Um, uh, it's like I can't speak for them because we don't want you to mistake me for them,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
As a distinction. I don't know why, but I just felt like if this is their first time hearing of the Apostolic Johannite Church, I would love for them to really understand that like just how open and uh, um, accepting a community that is. Like you don't even really need to be Christian. Look at me. Like what kept me around is this openness, you know. Um, anyway, yeah, I felt like just a little postscript there, Jonathan. I hope I won't be I don't know what ostracized,
Anathematized.
Anathematized,
anathematized.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think that's 100% correct, Jason, and maybe I'll start working that into my speech. So, we didn't come on just to praise our denomination. We're not trying to make converts, and we won't,
Yeah.
because chances are nobody is going to go and join the AJC because they saw this. But if there is one in your community, you stick your head in. It's great, but it's at the point where even our lead bishop, our patriarch. I always say lead bishop because not everybody's familiar with that term patriarch, right?
Mhm.
In this context, he doesn't even lay out in a systematic way his theology and beliefs publicly because he does not want to overly influence somebody's spiritual journey. Now, he'll lay out some of the technical aspects, sometimes in great detail, to Jason, who doesn't who doesn't have a liturgical churchy background. So why do we do this? Why do we do that? What they call orthopraxy over orthodoxy,
Right.
right? That
Yes.
there is, that there are things that are done organizationally and ritually that have to be done a certain way. But the head of the church won't even lay out his own personal religious beliefs in fear of overly influencing somebody because that's how open they want to be, right? So yeah, Jason, I think you definitely hit the ball out of the park, and I think I will start adding in that asterisk with that other asterisk just so people have know why I am saying that disclaimer.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's an important point. Absolutely. And a lot of people I think will come to these kinds of organizations at first and automatically have this knee-jerk idea that it's monolithic. But I mean,
Mhm.
everything we talked about today was, and a lot of stuff you guys talk about on your podcast
Yeah.
shows exactly what we're talking about, this confluence and evolution of ideas. And I think the things that are going to be the most useful truly as we enter deeper into an age whose crises require spiritual answers
Oh boy.
is
Yeah.
going to it's going to require an openness, a little bit more of an open format. So I
Mm.
appreciate you guys coming on. Everybody gets a canned question. And you guys are not going to get off light. Three, and you guys can go 3 and 3, or you could do
Mm.
1, 2, and 3 if you want. Or you could just give me 6 total. Between the two of you, 3 of your favorite books on Gnosticism that you would recommend to anybody that's listened to this conversation.
Oof.
I know it's hard, keeps you on your toes, but
Oh man. Uh, Maybe we'll just each do 3 and 3 because I don't know. Like
Yeah, you
Yeah,
go for it,
publish.
Jason. Yeah.
Um, uh, Probably, I would say I'm going to steal this away from Jonathan, so sorry. Um, the nog comedy, the collected nog comedy, I think is like, if anything, because it's collected, it gives you such a sense of the plurality.
Yeah.
There are texts that contradict other texts. There's practically like there's like the Gospel of Thomas, which some say isn't even Gnostic, and yet it's in this collection that Gnostics hold to be important. So that's a great book. Um, Philip K. Dick's Valis, I think, is a trip. The only trick is to not make it a gospel either. It belongs in the same plurality as the non-comedy. Um, and then what would be my third? You know, I think I would actually go with Plato. I think I would maybe pick like you were saying there, like the Timaeus. I think is probably like a um, those are great ways to, especially if you're approaching them with that openness and plurality. I think they're great ways to like dive right into to the meat of both the criticality that I pointed out earlier, um, and that ineffable yet always compelling spark that we're reaching for.
Yeah, I would say the Gnostic New Age by Dr. April DeConnick. You know, it's a scholarly book, but it's written for a general audience. It's very easy to read. It's a lot of fun. You know, it's a newer book. She has some cutting edge scholarship in there, but it's also fun. So she does use I think it's a movie every chapter. Maybe it's other works of art as well. But you know, she explains different ideas within Gnosticism and the different Gnostic groups by opening up with a film, right, and then using that as an example. So there's that. Living Gnosticism by Jordan Stratford. It kind of lays out what Gnosticism is, what modern
Mm,
liturgical Gnosticism is. It's a blessed 80 pages or something, because a lot of the times in this world, right, okay, here's a book. Oh, okay, it's 7,000 pages, and it's very confusing, and it has all these words I don't understand. So that's a good one. Jason, you said Valis by PKD, right? So I would stick in
mhm.
a work of fiction in there as well, a novel of some kind. So either Moby Dick or
Yeah.
maybe the collected works of Blake, or actually my final answer I know would be Radio Free Albemuth by Philip K. Dick,
Mm.
which is his alternate version of Valis.
That's my favorite PKD novel, actually.
Oh, awesome! Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, I love it too. It's really great, and more people should know about it. I think there actually was a movie adaptation though, which apparently isn't very good. But it's yeah, it does need to be better known, and it should be read as part of the 4-part Valis series, particularly since the other two books
Mm.
in that series don't really have anything to do. I mean, I shouldn't say they don't have anything to do, because obviously they have a lot to do, but they're not continuations of the story in the book Valis. So,
Right.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, there's technically no wrong answers, but you guys knocked that out of the park. So I appreciate you guys coming on. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to everything that you've got coming up for us, and I hope to speak with you guys again very soon.